So if you were ever unlucky enough to suffer from severe frostbite, like really bad frostbite, your absolute first instinct would be to run your freezing hands under hot water. Or maybe, hold them right up to a roaring fire.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you are freezing cold, so you desperately want heat.
Right. And medically speaking, doing that is the worst possible thing you could do. The thermal shock will instantly destroy your tissue. It is just a catastrophic move.
Totally catastrophic.
And today we're unpacking a fascinating, highly evocative, translated essay that asks a very uncomfortable question. What if we treat broken societies, and broken human beings for that matter, the exact same destructive way?
Yeah, we are diving into an essay by a writer named Thawing titled, Why Should the King Flute Complain About the Willows? The Spring Wind Does Not Reach the Human Past.
Quite a title.
It really is. And it's a masterclass in using ancient geography to diagnose modern psychological and spiritual crises. I mean, it starts with poetry and topography, but before you know it, you are waist deep in an exploration of societal trauma, the danger of radical revolutions, and a highly counterintuitive method for genuine healing.
Which is exactly why we selected this for you today. Whether you are navigating a massive life transition, fascinated by cultural history, or just trying to figure out why certain people or entire nations seem completely stuck in destructive patterns, this deep dive is going to offer a completely new mental model.
Absolutely.
We are going to explore how we process trauma, why we sometimes crave chaos, and how to actually thaw out a frozen situation without destroying it in the process. Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start by setting the scene at human past, because the physical environment here is really everything.
Right. The author builds his entire premise on a stark geographical reality. If you look at the central plains of China, they enjoy 4 very distinct, reliable seasons.
Like clockwork.
Exactly. There is a traditional saying that by the 5th or 6th 9-day period after the winter solstice, you can walk down to the river and watch the willows turning green. The ecosystem functions like a well-oiled machine. Spring is an inevitability. It arrives, it warms the earth, and life responds.
But even when you move further west into places like Gansu province, cities like Tianshui or Wuwei, spring might be a little delayed, but it eventually shows up.
Right, it gets there.
But Human Pass operates under entirely different rules. It is effectively a geographical anomaly. Human Pass is just battered by these relentless, screaming winds. It gets choked by sandstorms, and it is constantly hit by unimpeded cold currents rushing down from higher elevations.
And to really drive this isolation home, the author contrasts Human Pass with towns that are just next door, places like Jiquan and Jiyuguan.
Just a stone's throw away.
Yeah. In those neighboring areas, you see red apricot branches blooming. You have rivers warming up enough for ducks to swim and flutter around. There is a palpable vitality. Yet, right over at Human Pass, the willows are described as drooping as if in tears.
Wow. As if in tears.
Yeah, they are completely barren, unable to compete with the verdant green exploding all around them.
It is such a relatable frustration if you've ever dealt with a stubborn microclimate.
Oh, for sure.
I'm thinking of like a permanently shaded corner of a garden. Literally feet away, you have tomatoes and sunflowers thriving in the heat. But this one specific corner remains perpetually cold and damp. Nothing grows. It totally resists the changing of the seasons. It is trapped in a perpetual winter no matter what the calendar says.
What's fascinating here is that physical reality is the springboard for the essay's central metaphor. The title itself, Why Should the King Flute Complain About the Willows?, is a reference to a classic ancient poem.
Right.
The poem describes a flute playing a sorrowful tune, almost as if it is complaining that the willow branches haven't turned green yet. But the author steps in and asks us to fundamentally reevaluate that blame. Like, should we really be angry at the willow tree for failing to sprout?
And the answer is obviously no, because the willow isn't defective. The environment is defective. The spring wind does not reach the pass. The conditions are so incredibly harsh and unforgiving that growth is just a physical impossibility.
Exactly. By establishing that baseline, the author is urging us to shift our judgment. We spend so much time blaming the individual, the drooping willow, for its failure to thrive. We wonder why it lacks resilience.
Right.
But if we pull back, we see that the systemic environmental conditions are completely suffocating any chance of flourishing. The environment dictates the capacity for life.
So if it isn't physical weather blocking the spring, what is it? Because here is where the essay pulls off a massive pivot. We leave botany and geography behind, and the spring wind transforms into a metaphor for spiritual and moral nourishment.
Yes.
We're talking about the greatest creator's spring wind, this universal force of vitality, and the author turns his focus to the eastern land, referring to China, to diagnose a spiritual drought.
He paints a picture of a landscape completely blanketed in ice and snow, untouched by the spiritual spring wind that seems to be greening the rest of the world. And he provides a very unsparing diagnosis of why this freeze exists.
Unsparing is a good word for it.
Yeah, he argues that the culture has abandoned its philosophical bedrock. He claims the society ignores universal creative forces, ignores the Tripitaka, which are the core Buddhist scriptures, and operates without God, Buddha, or fundamental virtues like law, order, loyalty, kindness, and filial piety.
Okay, I have to step in here because that list of grievances feels incredibly cynical. It borders on apocalyptic.
It does.
So what does this all mean? When he says a culture is entirely devoid of kindness and filled only with deceit, greed, and falsehood, is he essentially writing off this entire culture as a permanently flawed lost cause? Is he saying they're inherently flawed or just describing a temporary state caused by external forces?
Well, it is a devastating critique, and it is important to clarify our own position here. We aren't, adopting or endorsing this sweeping political or cultural condemnation. Right, exactly. We're unpacking the author's philosophical framework. Within the logic of his argument, he is using this extreme language to explain a mechanism. When a society loses basic civic virtues, when trust, kindness, and moral order evaporate, the culture effectively loses its spiritual topsoil. The ground turns to permafrost.
Well, I see.
So the spring wind of progress or universal nourishment could blow with all its might, but there is no soil left to absorb it.
The moral deficit acts as an impenetrable shield. It operates exactly like the fierce sandstorms of human past. It violently repels any incoming warmth.
Precisely. And addressing your point about it being a lost cause, the extremity of his language is actually a setup for profound optimism.
Wait, really? Optimism?
Yeah, he is mourning the current state because he desperately yearns for a utopian transformation. He asks, when will the spring wind finally reach this eastern land? He envisions a thawed-out world filled with majestic landscapes, abundant resources, honest folk, and what he beautifully calls warblers' songs and swallows' dances. He genuinely believes the ice can melt.
But the method of melting that ice is where history provides a very dark lesson. Because there was a specific moment when a massive force claimed to have successfully brought the spring wind to this frozen land.
Yes, there was.
Let's look at the Cultural Revolution. There is this fascinating artifact from that era mentioned in our source material.
Yeah.
It's a commemorative medallion of Chairman Mao.
Right. And on the reverse side of this medallion, there is an inscription that directly references the ancient poem we've been discussing. It reads, "The spring wind has crossed the Yumen Pass."
Oh, wow.
The messaging was incredibly clear. The mighty eastward wind of the revolution was declaring absolute victory over the stubborn microclimate. The implication was that radical political upheaval was the exact warmth the land needed to finally bloom.
But the lived reality, according to this essay, was the exact opposite of a gentle spring breeze. The author calls this revolutionary force an unprecedented gale, a violent, wicked storm that snapped branches and ripped trees from the ground.
A total disaster.
I'm speaking from experience here as someone who has accidentally obliterated a peace lily this way. It is like looking at a delicate, dying houseplant and deciding to water it with a high-pressure power washer. Yes, you brought water, but you destroyed the plant in the process.
That is the perfect analogy. And the tragedy of the power washer is that technically you did bring water to the plant. You delivered the resource that was completely absent. But the velocity of the delivery system destroyed the very thing you were trying to save.
You blasted the soil away.
Exactly. You blasted the soil away, shredded the leaves, and snapped the stem. The author argues that these historical forces, what he calls these sinister and evil winds, did exactly that to the cultural landscape.
They didn't nourish the willows. They left them uprooted in rows. The fundamental vitality of the land was just scoured away,
leaving the environment even more hostile to future growth than it was before the storm arrived.
But that creates a massive paradox. If using the power washer destroys the garden every single time, why is it human nature to keep reaching for it? Why do people look at a frozen landscape and just, invite a hurricane?
The psychology of the storm is perhaps the most unsettling part of this entire deep dive. The author argues that when a society or an individual, for that matter, endures prolonged periods of trauma and stagnation, chaos becomes normalized.
Trauma as second nature.
Yes. When your daily reality is a barren, frozen wasteland, you develop a subconscious craving for upheaval. Habit becomes second nature.
If you have ever stayed in a highly toxic workplace or a dysfunctional relationship simply because the daily chaos felt familiar, you understand exactly the psychological trap Wu Feng's is describing here on a national scale.
Exactly.
Who gets so used to the freeze that the idea of a slow, quiet thaw feels impossible.
You start to believe that the only way to break the ice is with dynamite. The essay quotes a specific, dangerous mentality that takes root in these conditions. To become rich, one must take risks. People look around at the desolation and convince themselves that a destructive, sweeping storm is the required catalyst to change the status quo. They mistakenly equate violence with progress.
They want to burn it all down just to feel something warm.
Yeah.
And the author does not hold back on describing the visual toll of this mindset. When a society embraces that destructive urge, the aftermath is chilling. He describes withered grass, unsettled chickens and dogs, rampant wild beasts, and bones piled in the wilderness. It is a landscape of total devastation, born entirely from a desperate desire for rapid change.
It is the ultimate consequence of impatience. We see a problem, a frozen environment, and we demand an immediate radical solution, completely ignoring the collateral damage.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. The author points out that despite all this recurring devastation, very few wise and calm thinkers have actually devised solutions. So if a violent storm isn't the answer to a frozen landscape, what is? How do you thaw out a frozen system without killing it?
To answer that, we have to return to the medical reality of frostbite that you brought up at the start. The author introduces a highly counterintuitive yet perfectly accurate physical analogy for healing.
Okay.
If your hands and feet are completely numb from severe cold, the absolute worst intervention is applying direct heat.
Which feels completely backward. Our brains scream at us to find a fire or boil some water.
Right.
But applying extreme heat to frozen tissue causes the capillaries to burst. The shock is too massive. You will literally cause gangrene.
Exactly. The author lays out the precise, gradual steps required to actually save the limbs. First, you must rub the frozen hands with ice or snow.
Applying more cold to a freezing person. It sounds like torture.
I know, it does. But it is about temperature equalization. You have to match the trauma of the tissue to begin a painfully slow transition. You rub the limbs with snow. Once the body begins to barely register that input, you soak them in cold water to slowly reduce the numbness.
Ah, I see.
You wait. You observe the tissue, and only after the body has fully acclimated to the cold water do you finally introduce lukewarm water.
The patience required for that is staggering.
It is. But if we connect this to the bigger picture of societal or spiritual healing, it is an incredibly profound blueprint. You cannot force a frozen society or a frozen soul into immediate warmth.
Right.
If you demand an overnight radical transformation, the shock will shatter the foundation.
Yeah.
True transformation requires an agonizingly slow, deliberate process of thawing.
You have to meet the system exactly where it is. You must use the ice and snow of gentle, incremental change rather than the boiling water of violent upheaval. It is about recognizing the fragility of the roots.
Yes.
And this realization leads directly to the conclusion of the source text, where the author introduces the concept of Lifechanyuan. Think of this not as a physical compound, but as a conceptual sanctuary.
Right, a philosophical baseline.
Exactly. Where the entire approach to progress is inverted. Instead of demanding massive storms, Lifechanyuan advocates for gentle breezes and fine rains, the kind of nourishment that happens quietly, without a sound.
He argues that the true prosperity of any industry or any society ultimately depends on this slow, deliberate soul's nourishment. The essay ends by asking every sage, every thinker who enters this conceptual space of Lifechanyuan to quietly reflect on a single question.
Which is?
What kind of wind is blowing in your environment? Is it a destructive gale masquerading as progress, or is it a gentle breeze that actually allows the willows to sprout?
It is a question that sticks with you long after the reading is done, and it really synthesizes the entire journey we've taken on this deep dive. We started by looking at a weeping willow trapped in a stubborn microclimate, completely unable to grow because the environment simply wouldn't allow it.
And then we moved from that physical landscape into a diagnosis of spiritual drought, exploring how the loss of fundamental virtues strips away the cultural topsoil, leaving the ground completely frozen against progress.
We analyzed the horrific historical mistake of using a power washer to water a dying garden, seeing how radical, violent winds uproot the very things they claim to be saving. We explored the dark psychology behind why we sometimes crave those destructive storms just to break the monotony of the cold.
And ultimately, we learned the crucial life-saving importance of thawing out frostbite with snow instead of fire. While this essay is deeply rooted in the specific history, geography, and culture of China, the psychological blueprint it provides is entirely universal.
It really is.
It is a universal warning against the seductive danger of demanding overnight radical transformations in any area of life. True nourishment, like a gentle spring rain, is quiet. It is incredibly gradual, and it fiercely respects the current fragile state of the soil it is trying to water.
And that brings us to our final thought for you to ponder as you go about the rest of your day. We've spent this time analyzing massive historical winds and societal shifts, but let's shrink this down to your own personal reality.
That's a great idea.
Building on Suing's ideas, we all have areas of our lives that are suffering from emotional or circumstantial frostbite, places where we feel entirely stuck, isolated, or numb.
Oh, absolutely. Everyone has those.
When you find yourself trapped in one of those frozen situations, your first instinct is almost always going to be reaching for the boiling water. We want the fiery, dramatic upheaval. We want to quit the job without notice, burn the bridge, pack up the car, and scorch the earth.
We want a quick fix.
Right, we crave the high-pressure power washer to blast away the stagnation. But instead of reaching for that destructive fire, what is the ice and snow you need to patiently apply to yourself first? What is the small, incremental, incredibly frustrating but medically necessary step that will begin to slowly thaw you out without destroying your roots in the process?
Because if you have the discipline to endure that slow thaw, the spring wind will eventually reach you.
It absolutely will. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.